Well, folks, recently a 240-page report regarding Islamophobia in Canada was recently published. It's by Jasmine Zine. And you might be surprised to hear that in addition to examples of Islamophobia, she condemns those who are enablers of Islamophobia, including my dear guest here, Raheel Raza. And I say you might be surprised to hear that because, of course, Miss Raza is a practicing Muslim. Well, first of all, Raheel, thank you for coming down to Rebel News headquarters. Always appreciate your time. This is baffling. Somehow, you, as a practicing Muslim, you are an enabler of Islamophobia, according to Ms. Zine. How?
Thank you, David. Thank you so much for having me. But before I answer your question, I want to wish all our viewers a very Merry Christmas.
Oh, goodness gracious.
That would make me an Islamophobe. Not happy holidays, not a wishy-washy anything else, but actually distinctly a Merry Christmas, recognizing the birth of Jesus Christ. Now, you'll be surprised to know, David, and maybe the viewers, that as a Muslim, I'm directed by my faith to love Jesus Christ. Right. Jesus is mentioned more times in the Quran than Prophet Muhammad.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yes.
Okay, then.
And so whether it makes me an Islamophobe or not, I really love the Christmas season. And I want to wish, they call me the Merry Muslim.
Oh, geez. Well, thank you so much for that, Raheel. I hope nobody is triggered out there and files an Ontario Human Rights Tribunal against you for mentioning Christmas and Christ. That's kind of third-rail talk in this day and age of, happy holidays and calling Christmas trees remembrance trees.
Right. Well, I'm not at all in favor of that. This is where the woke culture and political correctness have got us. And as you know from long time, I am not politically correct. So, Islamophobia.
Yeah. How are you an enabler? That's what I want to know, Raheel.
First of all, for our viewers, let me mention that the term Islamophobia does not have a clear definition. It's very murky. And therefore, it's picked up and used by anyone. It was actually coined. The term Islamophobia was coined after 9/11 to stop and stifle any debate and discussion about Islam or Muslims.
I did not know it was that recently coined.
Yes, the term Islamophobia. Okay. So the people who are supporting this, the supporters and enablers and promoters of this idea, say that it is a critique of Islam. But where is the critique of, where is the Judeophobia or the Christianophobia or Hinduphobia? When we look at the actual statistics, let's look at the facts. The statistics say that hate crimes have been the highest against the Jewish community,
that's correct,
the LGBTQ community, the minorities, the Black community. So, yes, there is xenophobia, bigotry, and racism against all communities. But to single out this idea that it is just Muslims who are victims of some kind of terrible racism and bigotry all over Canada is naive, to say the least.
So is that what Ms. Zine is getting to, Raheel, when she calls you an enabler of Islamophobia, for the mere fact that what you just said was the truth? I mean, I think the number one victims of hate crimes in Canada for the last several years has been the Jewish community. So the fact that you would just tell the truth, according to the statistics that the police receive, that makes you an enabler of Islamophobia? I'm not sure I get it.
Well, the Islamophobia industry, it's a very well-funded industry.
Right.
And those who get funded by this so-called industry, and it's huge, it's global, and it has grown, because it gets traction. So they need some scapegoats, right? Especially if they're going to get funding from the government or from anyone else, an organization, to produce a report. They have to mention some names. So who do they choose? A 72-year-old grandmother who is on dialysis?
Unbelievable.
That's who they choose. So when I criticize Muslims who are behaving badly, and I will continue to do so, always. And that has been something that, my viewers have heard time and again. How does that make me Islamophobic? For the record, I have never criticized my faith, the faith of Islam. I differentiate between Islam as a faith and Islam as a political tool.
Right.
And people, organizations like the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda, and we've seen these are not just things that I'm conjuring up through my imagination. We know that there has been violence, radicalization, extremism in the Muslim community. And so when I criticize that, because I am a Muslim and I need to work from within the faith, how does that make me an Islamophobe? How does that make me an enabler? So in my perspective, what Professor Zain has done is slander, defamation, demonization, and she has essentially put a target on my back. There was a report in the Toronto Star on December 10th by Shri Paratkar on Jasmine Zain's report, that how wonderful that this woman has,
knew it.
done this fantastic report, and, Islamophobia is rampant in Canada. And of course, my name was mentioned in that article. So on a serious note, let's look back at what happened to Salman Rushdie.
Yes.
I wonder what they would call him.
But you know what? Actually, that's a great question.
Yes.
What would be her assessment of Salman Rushdie? Is he an enabler of Islamophobia because he dared to write something that in some circles of Islam is deemed uber offensive?
I suppose so, but this is the point. Anyone who speaks out or says anything that's outside the box or questions, which is our right as human beings to question. See, now I have been put into the category of a dissident or an ex-Muslim. I've never been an ex-Muslim. I'm a proud Muslim. I do my work.
So she doesn't even have her facts right then.
She obviously doesn't have her facts right. But coming back to what happened to Salman Rushdie, there was a fatwa put on him.
Correct.
And 20 years later, some Yahoo decided that Salman Rushdie needs to be heard, so he attacked him in a public forum. And today, Salman Rushdie is seriously wounded.
That's right. And Raheel, we spoke about this earlier this year. To me, the most disturbing aspect of that story, and it happened in New York State, was that his would-be assassin was born after the publication of the Satanic Verses. He wasn't even around on the planet, and yet he had been indoctrinated with propaganda that you have to kill this individual is a good thing.
So this is what happens.
Yeah.
You see, when the seed is sown that this person is labeled as a dissident or an ex-Muslim or an enabler of Islamophobia per se, then some person decides that, okay, it is justified and all right for me to harm this person. This is what the blasphemy laws are all about, that this person has committed blasphemy. But when the information is incorrect, and this is, what my dilemma is, who allows someone like Ms. Zain to be the judge, jury, and the executioner? Has she been given divine sanction by God to become the judge on whether another person is a Muslim or not? So, hey, move over Jesus Christ. Jasmine Zain is the new Messiah.
And it should be noted, Raheel, that another prominent Canadian Muslim personality, that would be Tariq Fatah, that was also a target of Miss Zain too, wasn't he?
Yes, he's been mentioned.
And and listen, I love Tariq. I don't agree with everything that he says and writes, of course, but he is a champion for free speech and human rights. Where's his connection in Islamophobia?
And most importantly, once again, he has never declared himself to be an ex-Muslim.
Yeah.
So, you see, that is my decision. If I say I am a Muslim or not, it's not for anyone else to judge. This is between me and my Creator. I pray 5 times a day. I've been for the Hajj. I fast. Do I have to get a certificate from Ms. Zain saying that I am a Muslim or not? And who gives her the right? Where is this coming from?
And I would say this, Raheel, I think a big question here is, what is the unspoken strategy behind this report? As we mentioned, 4 years in the making, 240 pages. She's naming names and getting a lot of that wrong by the sounds of things. So what is the goal of this report in the first place?
Well, when I connect the dots, as I said, first of all, they need scapegoats. When you get funding,
Yeah.
You have to produce a report. So let's find some scapegoats to mention in this.
Thank God Canada is a nation full of trees, because we have the resources to print off these bureaucratic tomes. But anyways, go ahead, Raheel.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when I connect the dots, I see that the direction is coming from the Ayatollahs in Ottawa. And we go back to motion M103. I stood in the Parliament of Canada in Ottawa and said M103 is going to make things really difficult, because anyone then who wants to label another person an Islamophobe, because this is about Islamophobia, can do that at will. And there's nobody who will stop that person from saying so.
Yeah, it was almost Orwellian, that bill, I found, because it was like, Bill M103 was all about racism is bad, but Islamophobia is especially bad. It's kind of like all animals are created equal. Some animals are more equal than others. And again, that was a Liberal MP that came out with that proclamation. And
it was a Muslim MP
correct.
Who brought this forward. And it was that time I specifically said, this is going to be dangerous. And lo and behold, this is exactly what it brings us to. That someone stands up and accuses other Muslims of being dissidents and enablers of Islamophobia. How dare they?
Oh, and some of the people that were the most disturbed were from the Islamic community. Another example, many years before that, as you know, Raheel, member Premier McGuinty was going to bring in Sharia law for family court issues. And I spoke to Muslims at the time that said, holy smokes, this is why we crossed the pond to get away from this nonsense, and it's following us. What are your thoughts?
I was among the people who lobbied against that very, very heavily. So that makes me an Islamophobe? No.
I guess according to Miss Zion, it doesn't make you an enabler.
Absolutely. So, this is, I follow my faith thoroughly. I don't have to give an explanation. It's between me and my Creator.
Yeah.
No one is there to judge whether I'm a good Muslim or a bad Muslim or a Muslim or not.
Yeah.
We are talking here about human rights. The issues that I critique, which is extremism, violence, radicalization, affect all of humanity.
Yes.
They are a human rights issue. And I will continue to speak out against them. The reason I speak about Muslim extremism is because I am a Muslim.
And
you, as a Christian, have the right to speak about what's happening in Christianity. The Jews need to address what's happening in Judaism, but it's my ethical and moral responsibility when I see Muslims behaving badly to say this is not right. This is not what the faith is accepting. This is political. Now, I'll give you an example. There are terrible things happening in Iran, where the regime is cruel. They're killing people. They're torturing them. Now, globally, thousands of people have come out on the streets to lobby against the regime in Islam. And these are Ayatollahs who, according to the Shia faith, are the leading clergy in Iran. Now, the people who come out are Muslims. Are they all Islamophobes because they are speaking out against the cruelty of the regime in Iran and they want a regime change? And this is a human rights issue.
Well, you know what, Raheel? That's a great question to pose to Jasmine Zion, I would say. Because what I noticed, you're right, there's been worldwide protests. There are being Iranians paying with their lives for taking a courageous stance in these protests. But I'll tell you one group that the silence is deafening, so to speak. Where are the feminist groups when it comes to this? Because, and I spell out feminist groups because the biggest victims and what started this snowball rolling are the women in Iran, where there's a different standard applied to them when it comes to, for example, dress codes.
Well, of course, where are the feminist group? But more than that, where are the Muslims? I'd like to ask Miss Zain if she has addressed to her class and her students issues of anti-Semitism, issues of what is happening in Iran to the women, issues of minorities like Christians being persecuted in Muslim lands, and they are. Has she ever addressed these issues? Muslim upon Muslim violence. I've spoken out about that as well. So in a way, I feel very sorry for her students. Because the kind of bigotry and misinformation that she is passing on to them is going to make it very difficult for them to, in the future, deal with issues that we are all faced with.
And Raheel, and we're running out of time, but I wonder, did she address in her report, I would say, the most prominent and most disturbing act of Islamophobia going on in the world right now, and that is China's treatment of the Uyghur Muslims, literally being put into camps, some being executed. They are disenfranchised. I don't see anyone, speaking out about this. The likes of the NBA, Apple. Oh, it's business as usual in China. Nothing to see here, folks. I think this is appalling. And why is it that there is a lack of outrage about true hatred, cruelty, even execution of Muslims in China?
Well, you're absolutely right. You never hear there should have been a 250-page report on the persecution of Muslims in China and in other places, because, that is an important issue. We are talking about racism and bigotry. Let's talk about real racism and bigotry. And so, there are isolated incidents of violence against Muslims. It happens everywhere in the world, and we have to condemn them very strongly, and we do. It should not take place anywhere. But this idea that Muslims are the only victims and they are the ones who are facing racism. I mean, Muslims are thriving in Canada. Yeah. There are Muslims in the Canadian government. They have businesses. They are doing so well. Canada is the safest place where Muslims live free lives. Ask those who are persecuted in their own homelands. Ask the Iranians who can't live ordinary lives. This is a welcome and wonderful country. But we need to understand that we just can't go about labeling and targeting specific people because we don't like what they say. And because maybe they're speaking the truth.
Well, Raheel, I know you're not going to let this stand. You've given me a letter that you're sending out to the media clarifying the record, and good for you. Because I guess Ms. Zine is entitled to her own opinions, but she's certainly not entitled to her own facts. And that's the biggest issue I find with her report. It is factually flawed.
One quick thing I'll point out, and you're a journalist and you know that, when you mention someone in an article or a report, you give them the respect and the benefit of the doubt by calling them and asking for their opinion.
Yeah.
Neither did the reporter from the Toronto Star, Ms. Paratkar, take the time, and she knows who I am.
Yes.
She didn't take the time to call me and say, Raheel, your name is mentioned here. What is your opinion?
Yeah.
And neither did Ms. Zine. So what is the authenticity of someone who just labels another person, slanders them, and then sits back to watch it fall into place?
It's one of two things, Raheel. It's either that they have a political agenda to silence you, or that they're just bloody lazy. They just can't be bothered. Raheel, thank you so much for coming to the studio.
My pleasure.
I greatly appreciate it.
And Merry Christmas to you.
Well, and as to you, what are you celebrating around this time
Merry
of year?
Christmas.
Okay, then I don't want to offend anyone, and I'll tell you, Miss Zine, if you happen to be watching this, really get your facts straight. The likes of Raheel Raza, the likes of Tariq Fatah, Salman Rushdie, these aren't the problems. These aren't enablers of Islamophobia. Rather, these are the voices of reason. You should realize that. Folks, keep it here. More of the Ezra Levant show to come right after this.
That's an excerpt from my show every night. It's called The Ezra Levant Show. That's me, Ezra Levant. You can see the whole thing behind our paywall. Well, there's a lot of goodies behind there. I do a show every weeknight. My friends Sheila Gunn Reid and David Menzies and Nat and Kat have their shows too. You get a ton of content for just $8 a month. There's so much in there you won't find anywhere else. Go to rebelnewsplus.com.